Thank you, Kevin. It's great to be here. It's great to be teaching here. Great to see the room packed. I'll mention that the last house that Kevin just cited, it'll be one of the last things I show. So hopefully you'll hang out for that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the specificity of things. I'm interested in the specificity of things, and the reason this image is up here is how many know this place? It's been in the news a bit lately. I've been starting my lecture with this discussion for, I don't know, a decade or more, and I'm a native of Nashville. That's one thing Kevin didn't mention. I come from Nashville, Tennessee. I kind of discovered the desert going to school at Taliesin. So I don't have a degree, but I did go to Taliesin for 3 years and kind of just, went west of the Mississippi for the first time to go from Taliesin east to Taliesin west. I kind of, early on, I knew something attracted me about the West, visiting an uncle in Abilene, Texas, and going to a rodeo during a lightning storm. So actually, Texas was the first thing, and then Arizona was the next. And I just, spatially, I find it very compelling, and it's taught me, I think, how to see things in a different way. It's allowed me, when I go to any context, it allows me to see things differently. What's interesting about this is it's a water-leveled playa surface, the most naturally occurring level surface in nature. And there's this phenomenon of the moving rocks. And if you go there when the light is oblique to the surface, it's very interesting. At the south end of this 1.25 mile playa by 3/4 of a mile is over to the left is a hillside that just deposits rocks. And then it's a hanging valley. It's defined as a hanging valley, and it sits well above Death Valley, which is a huge, it's the size of Rhode Island. And they always thought that wind, maybe coupled with ice, sheets of ice, might sail these fairly heavy rocks north across the playa. And the smaller the rocks, the more distant they are out there in the playa. And it has literally been a mystery for 20, 30 years plus. And Caltech has mapped it, all this. Finally, somebody got the money to insert devices in the rocks. And when they started to move, to have cameras that actually videotape what was happening. That's how big of a mystery this thing was. And you can Google this now. I mean, this really just came out like a month or 2 months ago. A lot of my colleagues, friends, they all sent me this video because I talk about this. The most amazing thing is everyone thought that it was really nasty weather when these things moved. And the really amazing thing is that they're moving like midday, sunny. The ice at the south end of this field is melting and starting to move. And sheets of ice, sometimes they're moving on the sheet of ice, sometimes it's the ice is acting as beams that move the rocks. So it's this like perfectly sunny day, the ice is thawing and the rocks are moving, and nobody expected it. Nobody expected that to be the answer. what's interesting to me, the reason I start with this, is it goes to the specificity of things. And I think it's kind of our role as architects, I believe, that it's our utmost responsibility to hone the necessary skills to interpret, unearth, represent, frame, manifest meaningful, memorable, soulful places for our clients, our constituents, and our communities, hopefully ones that possess the latent ability to sustain the whims of fashion, the new, and hopefully just maybe to sustain the test of time. So it's this kind of a feeling that that sustainable design is actually design that people cherish, that they fall in love with, that it somehow resonates with the people and the places that we design for. And I think we have to look at the specificity of things really deeply to kind of be able to do that, right? And so that's why I was always attracted to this place. It's why I'm kind of amazed that they finally, somebody got together the money to figure this out. But that this maybe happens here on this place on the planet and nowhere else. And that, I'm interested in doing work that is against homogeneity, that's against being everywhere. I want to do work that's about being here, wherever here is, and being present in that place. And so that's why this image is up. Mentioned I started here. This is the first thing I built, which was a kind of distillation of a tent. If you know anything about being a student here, you're given a wood frame, and it sits on a concrete slab. You've got this 8-foot by 8-foot sheep herder's tent that's a kind of 8-foot by 8-foot pyramid of white canvas. I got rid of the wood frame. I cast the slab in the shape of the tent. I put 4 anchor bolts, 1 in each corner. I took the pipe, I hammered it, made it flat, drilled a hole in it, bent it, attached the frame that way to the slab, and then with some Velcro lifted the tent up like this so I got cross ventilation. It's a very simple, a very dumb thing, but it says a lot about how I think. For me, architecture is a process of distillation. I'm usually trying to distill things down. I'm usually interested in single stroke solutions. As Kevin mentioned, I had a really great apprenticeship that followed my apprenticeship at Taliesin with Will Bruder. The studio of Will Bruder in New River was where I was. And this is 1985. I started working with Will in 1985. And I was living in this on the left, which is one of the few built works by Paulo Soleri, and it's actually a work that I emulated when I was 13, when I went to the Nashville Public Library, and that project was published. And it's a pretty famous little house called the Dome in the Desert. Some interesting innovations. These are some images that the late Julius Schulman took. And so, I kind of lived here, worked here, and the last 6 years was on this project, which I was the co-designer, project and field architect. I was really ready to leave, but we saw a chance to go after this project. We were successful. I decided to stay, and the unusual thing is to not only be involved in the design, but to be involved in the entire process, from the interview, programming, documents, and then taking it into the field and being the the field architect that was also one of the design architects. It was also, I think, a first thing of looking at the context of a place and how that might inform an architecture. Well, before we got that project, I had bought a little piece of land here. This is Phoenix, fifth, now sixth largest city in America. It shrunk a little bit. This is this little pocket known as Sunny Slope, and there was a little piece of land right there that was for $27,500 in 1988. It was nobody knew what to do with this lot. It had a bunch of trash. I walked up this scar. There was a scar. There was a kind of old road that went up to the top of the site. Saw the sunset. Went to the nearest Circle K to dial the realtor and ended up getting this lot for a song. This was one of the first sketches. I often think in section first, and I also am thinking about construction. So this was an idea of how do you build on this site without a lot of money. So the idea was to get a 580 case backhoe, dig a footing line on the south, dig a footing line on the north, erect these monoliths, span the house between, drive into the house, walk up in between a public and private volume, the sound of water along the topography, creating a little pool, sleeping in the floor of the desert. This is pre-computer. This is airbrush. You'll see a range of renderings and drawings, none of which are with my hand. You'll see maybe some sketches with my hand like you just saw. But I'm very interested in drawing. I'm usually, the drawings are a result, the particular technique is a result of who I'm collaborating with. In this case, it was a friend of mine. It was a very conventional rendering at first, and we worked at making it this kind of what you see now. But it was this kind of, these monoliths that are in a non-bashful way coming out of the landscape. It's kind of, you know, a non-bashful landform. It originally was cast in place concrete and was going to construct it myself. I was going to be the contractor. The whole idea of doing 30-foot walls out of cast in place concrete became pretty frightening. Also didn't work structurally, it didn't work thermally. And you know, I was 26, 27. I started looking for a material that that made sense. I'd also thought about it as precast, and that didn't work. And that search for a material that would work with the idea led me to a new product called Integra. And Integra is a masonry product that is by a company that's specific to Phoenix. It's super light. It's a very interesting block company, and Phoenix was very much a brick town before World War II. After World War II, it became a kind of masonry town. But they saw their market share kind of going away to R19 frame stucco, and they developed this product to compete against that. I thought it was a product that was crying out to be cantilevered. And what's interesting about the product is that it has no end cells. It only has a 2/3 height middle cell. Why is that important? It reduces thermal wicking from the exterior face to the interior face by 66%. So you essentially have a skeletal frame of face shells with very little thermal wicking that are post-tensioned with 7/16 all thread rod that you see here, and that you see being terminated here with the steel plate washer there's a little indicator washer that tells that they've achieved tension. And then this guy's pumping the walls with foam, so you're getting an R28 wall with an 8-inch thickness. And the reason is not just the foam, it's also the lack of thermal wicking. So it's a post-tension wall system. This is it constructed, my mason called this the kind of skyscraper of the desert. It is, if you think about it, it looks like, well, what's holding it up? And that's even a bigger question when you realize there's no grout in this wall. None. There's only grout at this moment connection, at these 4 corners. It's conventionally reinforced 12/8/16 masonry to this floor slab. In the conditioned space from here up, it's 8/8/16 Integra. And so it's a hybridized cantilevered moment frame. So there are no shear walls, and because one of the ideas was that because it's following the scar of the landscape, it's kind of a band-aid that renders the site whole again. Light is moving through the length of the volume, so I didn't want any solid walls in that direction. So this is kind of the living room on the street, the bedroom in the floor of the desert. The light moving through the length of the volume. There are certain walls that are parallel to the monoliths that are recycled formwork. This is MDO that has had a chemical reaction with the concrete and created the form release agent and the concrete have a chemical reaction that creates this color. And so recycling $4,000 worth of formwork back into the partition system. This is kind of the entry sequence or into the living room. So the monoliths, one thing you'll notice is the plan of this house and then the monoliths are all driven by this kind of interest in what I call the tatami mat of America. So it's the 4x8 sheet of plywood. So the plan of the house is a spine configuration, 2 sheets together, 4x8. That creates a width 16 feet. And then the south monoliths are 8-foot monoliths. The north monoliths are 4-foot monoliths, letting in a greater amount of light. And then we've kind of tightened up the bed joints of the horizontal mortar joints in order to every 4 feet get a greater than 3/8 joint. Rake that out. So you have a 4x8 sheet of plywood and horizontal orientation on the south monoliths and vertical orientation on the north monolith. So kind of a proportioning system. This is my photographer suspended by a couple of us holding his legs, looking into the courtyard, which is this entry space that's a kind of multi-sensory experience. So you're not just opening a front door and it's visual, you're actually coming up into a breezeway that's cooler. The breeze on your skin is creating evapotranspiration. There's the sound of water. It's a microclimate. We use this plunge pool religiously in the summer to cool off before sleep. These steel stepping stones that create this different cadence. And then I wish this was my car, but it's not. It's my cost estimators. my Honda CRX at the time, I didn't think it said carport quite the way I wanted. So my cost estimator collects Porsches, and he had this one available. So it's kind of the spatially, it's about the monoliths are also they're this single stroke solution idea. Their structure, their thermal, their exterior finish, their interior finish, and they're spatially defining the space of the site. which is like putting blinders on a horse, kind of focusing view to the mountain preserve to the east, creating a sense of isolation with that mountain preserve. Kind of walking up in that canyon, walking out over the reflecting pool on these steel stepping stones. I kind of call this my poor man's Pilkington. I guess it's important to mention I built this for, the budget was $90,000. It was $120,000 at the end of the day, with a lot of sweat equity, an $880 a month mortgage. The kind of this TV in the desert. And that project led me to get my first commission that allowed me to exit Will Bruder's studio and start my own practice, which was 18 and a half years ago. And that was the Dialogue House. I like when you can describe a project with your hands. So this was how we talked about this project with the client, is that there was a volume that was pushed at the very back of the site. There was a busy arterial that moved through the neighborhood. There was a lot of power lines and funky bungalows, and there was going to be a house built over here across the street. And this way was a phenomenal view to the city. So elevating one volume that pointed to the valley and to the horizon, and then an idea of resort living, that you would put a towel over your shoulder, you would take a walk, you would actually kind of expand the dimensions of the site toward that view. You would walk down into a volume that's half terrace, half water, and it only looks to the sky. So kind of everything, nothing, a warm volume, a cool volume. That was the concept. These are, at the time, state-of-the-art digital renderings. We won a PA Design Award with that image of the hands and these very sophisticated renderings, which we're really talking about the client and the fact they both own their own businesses. They worked very hard. They really were only home in the evening, so it was about designing for the magic hour, like 30 minutes after sunset, and then designing for the evening. So there was an idea that the house would recede into the darkness, that the kind of life of the home would be supported by the apparent thinness of light. That volume would be projected to the view. You would walk under it as a kind of entry. You would descend into the pool. We were just above the horizon. It wasn't what I call in Phoenix a ski jump site. You weren't really high. You were just high enough that the city skyline started to stack up against the South Mountain and Sierra Estrella ranges, and it started to almost look like a real city. This is a weekday. At weekends it doesn't look that good. And then these are some finished images, so you can see the kind of context of the neighborhood. So walking under that volume, the volume projected to the view. This is the geology of the site, which inspired this finish. This is descending into the pool. The plan is a simple pinwheel geometry. 3 walls that are tall, that laterally stabilize the box in the air, which is framed with conventional gang nail trusses that create a certain thickness that we were okay with. It allowed us to meet the budget for this project, and then descending down into the pool. The volume that points to the horizon, there's a thickness that is entertainment and closet and powder room and kitchen and laundry, and trying to create a kind of elemental volume where some of the program is relegated to that thickness. So this inspired the stucco finish, which is an integral stucco, and this is on most of the geology in our Sonoran Desert, which is called a desert varnish. It's essentially a living organism that's a self-shading mechanism for the rock. So if you chip into it, you get petroglyphs, and it's silver in oblique light. It's purple, black, brown. It has a dynamic quality. So this is the same piece of stucco with just different lighting on it. So that was the finish of the volume. It's silver at times. It goes really dark at night. The interior, the dialogue between the warm and the cool. Something quite nice in the evening, and when it's low light, you get this wind-activated, water-refracted light in here. It's like a dance. It's like almost like watching a fire. That's kind of the foreground to the view. So I'm going to jump over here to the west side of the valley to a project that we did with Gould Evans, the Phoenix office of Gould Evans, the Palo Verde Library, Maryville Community Center. The context of this project was it was set in a historic park that was built kind of right as urban sprawl was starting to happen. So this community is known as Maryville. It's kind of one of the epicenters of urban sprawl. It's the western version of Levittown. How many y'all know about Levittown? So this was kind of the western version of that. Both William Levitt and John F. Long, who started this community, both testified at the United States Congress in support of the GI Bill, where returning GIs from World War II could buy a home with $1 down. Had a single family home ownership became a kind of God-given right in this country. This is one of the places that started. It was originally Cantaloupe Fields, and interestingly, John F. Long hired Victor Gruen to do the master plan. Some of the old timers in the room will know that name. But they did this interesting thing where they built this park first. They built the hospital, they built the post office, they built the community center, one of the first malls in the country, and then this started happening. So it was very idyllic, but then 50 years later, it's the highest crime rate in Arizona, highest teen crime rate. The park was basically floodlights at night, murders frequent, like, monthly, and it was not a good place. John F. Long was still involved, still lived here, and he got it on a bond issue to do a new library community center. We got excited about this because it was a mixed-use program. So we saw that the idea that you would have a park, you would have a library, you would have a community center. We started thinking about this kind of mind-body dialogue and the potential cross-pollination between these programs. This was the existing site. The library was dying back here off the main north-south arterial. It was dying behind this dead mall that had been, it was completely dead, vacant. The north half was an adaptive reuse into a middle school and elementary school. Hospital was still operational. There was a little 5,000 square foot community center and a pool that was the only thing we were charged with saving. That's the only thing we were supposed to save. And the feasibility study said this ball field would have to go away because the parking requirement for the new project would need to be 650 cars. So we went into the interview and we said, we think that's a really bad way to start off with the community, to erase this ball field. We talked about the mind-body dialogue, we got the project, but one of the first things we did is we set our staff in the parking lots of libraries, community centers, and pools counting cars. We went for a parking variance. We were successful. We were able to save this ball field, and that organized the site. So we organized the community center to be with the pool, with the ball field, and we saved a little corner of the park and associated the library with the more contemplative aspects of the park. The reduced and ample parking was a kind of pinwheel, and it was also to be shaded by the namesake of the library, which was the Palo Verde tree. The landscape architect on this project is now here permanently, Christy Tonight Landscape Architects. And Christy said this really amazing thing. She said, let's shade the parking lot. And, you know, that sounds real simple. That's just the kind of that I won't let go of. And you wouldn't believe the battle it took to do the trees in that grid, which required that they not be in a median, that they be at the end of the parking stall, that they create a uniform grid of shade. It was really about reducing the urban heat island effect, which is a phenomenon in Phoenix where the nighttime lows are no longer low. It's no longer like the classic desert that you've probably read about or you've been taught in your classes here. The nighttime lows are now 15 to 20 degrees higher than they were, 20 years ago because of the concrete and the asphalt in the valley. And so nighttime lows for our summer is like 95 instead of 75, 80. So it was, about doing that. This is a section about the mind, the exercise of the mind, the exercise of the body, the potential resonance between these two programs. So we started to see that they could be possibly two similarly scaled volumes, and there would be this kind of resonance between these two similarly scaled volumes, kind of like a tuning fork. This is an image of that. We recognized that the open collections of the library equaled the gym. We knew that the gym could kind of take over the building. There were two different departments we were trying to satisfy, and so we were trying to create some kind of equality between the library and the parks department. So all of the big box programs are in big boxes that are on the street. All the littler programs are relegated to these littler boxes that are taking a cue from this pool house to the north. There's an internal street that connects the library community center to the pool. And so one idea with the big box is looking at the local vernacular. In this case, the Circle K, the ubiquitous Circle K, and how it projects its program to the street. So we were interested in just doing that, projecting the program to the street, so that as you drove up and down 51st Avenue, you would see books, you would see people reading, you would see people playing basketball, you would understand the civic mission of the building and the community and understand that it's for you and that you've paid for it. And that it might make it more open, more used, and so it's really about advertising that this is available. And it has been, it's very greatly used. This is an image of what I was describing in plan. So the smaller boxes are integral colored charcoal Integra block that I mentioned on my house. This is that internal street, and then these are the big box programs. The big boxes, as they kind of project the program to the street. We conceived of the big boxes as reverse lanterns that would presence the deep context of this place, which is the light that's so phenomenal in the valley. And it was also an idea that the park would move through the building, and that all you needed was this window at the canopy line of the Palaveri tree. The idea of that material came from an earlier project and also a house that I was doing that didn't end up going into construction. Just looking at the capacity for material to reflect something 30,000 feet away. So you can see that cloud in that ceiling plane. And just the material in our renderings, we try to, this is summer solstice sunset. This is winter solstice sunset. The leaves are off the trees. This is the completed project. So you can see the corner part with the old Phoenix landscape, and the new Phoenix landscape will be the Palaveri trees, the xeriscape. These kind of elemental volumes in the park. The idea the park moves through. The way that's achieved is, you probably recognize it as stainless steel, but it's actually the rawest form of stainless steel that's available. And I'm interested often in the rawest material, like not the fancy materials. So what I discovered with this material, it's called number 2B. It's not number 4 brushed. It's not number 8 polished. It's only available between 7 and 12 gauge. It's where you take the stainless steel pig, which is akin to a copper ingot, the raw material, and it's the process of pressing that into a sheet good. And it's interesting in that it's more absorptive than it is reflective. So the idea was you put this 4-foot spindle of 1/8 inch thick, 10 gauge, mill finish stainless steel, 4 foot, comes in 5 foot tube, but 4 foot on a spindle. You stretcher level it, you shear it every 24 feet, and you hang it like you would glazing. This is a self-healing waterproof membrane, Z-girts. Air can ventilate out the top. Any rain that gets in can come out the bottom. From the exterior gyp sheathing out, this was done for $20 a square foot. So $5 a square foot more than Dryvit. That you have to paint and that the paint fades. So the idea is to do a lifetime material that requires no maintenance. That also, if needed, could be rapidly renewable, i.e. you just shear it into 8-foot sheets and sell it back to the marketplace. So I love the kind of the liquidity of that. It really is different than brushed, and it's 40% less energy to produce, 40% less expensive, and a kind of, a poetic idea. So I think it's an example of having a poetic intention and how do you manifest it. So these are some illustrative sections that talk about how that works. I was just talking about that. Also talks about how not only are we presencing the program to the street, but we also are getting bottom light, and then we also get top light. So it's a very well-balanced light for both the library and the athletic program. We're only conditioning the body. We're allowing the rest of the space to stratify, some things like that. This is a site section that talks about that 8-foot datum that runs through the project. So again, this tatami mat. The big box volumes are 32, these are 16, the trusses are 24, these are 12. That's kind of the proportioning system of the building. Big box construction. Steel studs, R19 frame, in a way wrapped on the outside with the stainless. On the inside of the library is this pattern of handmade paper books that are tilted in plan 2.5 degrees and in section 2.5 degrees to reduce the reverberation time of the space from 1.5 seconds to 3/4 of a second. But it was also an idea of books. So it's a kind of there's an idea that's pragmatic and an idea that's poetic. And the way we achieve that is with OSB, and we actually source the OSB from the one plant in Canada that uses predominantly aspen instead of southern pine or Doug fir, because we knew it would be lighter and it would look more like handmade paper. And then it can be sanded in a matter of seconds on this assembly line, and you can order it without the stamps, without the colored edges. So we're taking this material and creating this kind of worn wrapper in the space that's warming the space, that says something about the program, that is also the kind of reducing the reverb. The big box, I mean, you recognize this. This is just like any Target, Best Buy you've been in, but instead of the fabric face bat insulation that is the real acoustic absorber and also the thermal insulation, we dialed it black. We said, okay, we can order that stuff black. We can presence the daylight fixtures. And so the actual acoustic absorption is handled that way and through behind the book to the R19 frame insulation that's also absorbing. But this is about reflection and reducing reflection and reverberation. A kind of dialogue between the maple floor and that interior of the library. This, you know, it's 5,000 kids a day use this. It's the highest foot traffic of any community center or library, the second highest circ rate for the library. So this kind of cross-pollination is working. This normally, all the community centers in the City of Phoenix system are masonry block gel cells. And they get territorialized, there's really bad behavior, and we, on the case studies, we recognize that and we said, what if we make the community center transparent to the street, project program? We think it'll create a safer, more open environment, and it really has done that. So I'm going to jump outside of context of the desert to Wisconsin. This is a project called the Field House. It sits somewhere down here in what's known as the Grand Chute, which is the last retreating glacier of North America. They created the thumb of Wisconsin. This is Green Bay. And it also left phenomenal glacial till that is great for feed crops, which is great for cattle, hence the dairy state. And underneath this really black earth of Wisconsin is like almost Carrara-like white limestone. And all the gravel and sands are really, really white. You have these things in the landscape. You have prairie that becomes forest. You have apples. You have all these feed crop for the cattle. And I had a client that called and that had been in Phoenix. We were going to do a house in Phoenix. He hated Phoenix, so he moved back to the northern part of the country where he was from. He loved seasons. He sent me a program that said, it's titled Land, Sky, and Seasons. That was the title of the program that listed, you know, how many bedrooms and that kind of thing. He said, I got a 16-acre cornfield. Would you like to do a house? I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. We went, we did the reconnaissance. You know, it's really cold there. We looked at farmhouses like this that block the north winds. This is facing south. The site was this 16-acre cornfield behind some houses, behind a highway. We decided to place the house at the very top part of the site, the very north part of the site, against this existing hedgerow of tall trees. One, to protect the house from the winds from the northwest winter winds. Open the house to the south sun, across the field, And then the idea that this field would always be planted with different crops. So one year it's oats, one year it's corn, one year it's soybeans. And there's an apple orchard that's a kind of memory piece for the father of this client, that was one of the last memories of them together picking apples. A little wetland. This is how it's working as a kind of environmental instrument. It's basically you don't turn on the heat in the winter. This is how that works. This is how it appears in the landscape. So the idea was that it appears as an object of utility in the landscape, akin to the barns. You really don't understand its mission in the landscape until you're up close. This is the north and the west. You're looking at the entry drive that comes up to this south aspect. You get out, you walk on this gravel, you walk to the field. This is a very large, translucent barn door, 36 feet long, that slides to the entry down here. Very well lit garage. This is the east elevation. There's a screen porch, a guest bedroom, media room downstairs, kind of upper barn loft. The volume it's a 24 by 96 by 32 to 36 foot high box that's clad in conventional roll-formed galvalume. It's a kind of a channel panel, male-female blind connection. So it's taking that standard material and working with it in vertical and horizontal orientation. And every dimension vertically and horizontally is based on the dimension of that panel so that no panel is cut. You enter into this kind of lower zone, which is the black earth of Wisconsin, which is mill finished steel, and you move up to the light of this barn loft that sits well above the garage and those lower spaces and looks out over the field. At the far end is a screened porch, and this is where you can have an espresso, a scone, sit in the morning sun. This is also, I'll point out this block. This is another example of, ran around, we looked at like houses that are under construction, buildings that were under construction. We had to pick a builder up there. I noticed that the block was really beautiful. I noticed it was tighter than any block I'd ever seen. In other words, it didn't have a coarse grain where you pull the block out of the mold. It was super tight. And it was super uniform in color. And the reason is what's under the ground. And so we ordered the block 1 mill run, meaning it's made the same day or two with the same temperature, same humidity. We did a 10% call on that block, raked all the joints. It looks like limestone. It's the cheapest block you can buy. So it's taking something ordinary, elevating it hopefully to something that's a little better than ordinary. You bathe in a custom concrete tub that's also that material we were just talking about, set in a mill finished steel surround in that lower volume, and then upstairs you're in a black walnut tub in a kind of glaciated light space. You walk from the screen porch all the way down 96 feet and you turn into this study. You go up this silo ladder because my client wanted to walk on the roof because he's an oncologist now, but he originally was in astrophysics and he had a master's degree in astrophysics from MIT and went to Stanford to get his doctorate. Realized he wasn't as into it as some of those guys and decided to go into medicine instead, but he's a very smart guy and he still loves looking at the stars, which he can do with this 16-inch Meade telescope. He also liked smoking cigars, so this is the cigar smoking, Martin Newsom cigar smoking bench. And this is where he can walk on the roof. Red, the inspector, never went up here. Luckily, it does meet OSHA, that this area to the telescope, but you can. This is white Atlantic cedar. It's actually works very well as a cold roof. The snow either blows off or it just sits there. Because there are no overhangs, you don't get ice damming, you don't get all those things. So it's kind of an odd roof form to do in a cold climb, but it actually works quite well. This is kind of quintessential image of home, this warm light that's emanating from this kind of volume that has something to do with how this landscape was formed. Another kind of field condition, very briefly, this is a project, a little competition that 3 of us from the United States and 3 from Canada were invited to do these 6 scholar cottages at Falling Water. And our concept was to walk the cottages into the forest and to use the forest as an overhang. So instead of having an overhang here, we used the forest. We wanted to be in the ecotone, which is the edge condition between field and forest. This is Falling Water down here. We would siphon. We knew the field would superheat, so we created thermal siphon, pull the cooler air from Bear Run up through the cottages. And this field had an incredible view to the Allegheny Mountains. We were also looking at the Amish culture. We were also looking at the fact they had these monocultures of spruce that were planted after people came back from World War II. They thought that this forest wasn't beautiful, that the Black Forest of Germany was beautiful. Even though this is a phenomenally beautiful forest. Like all the great hardwoods in America come from this forest. So the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy that have owned this since Edgar Kaufman Jr. Bequeathed it to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. They want to get rid of these monocultures of spruce and plant back chestnut and other hardwoods that are indigenous. And so our idea was to fell that monoculture, to dry it. There are all these mills up and down the road to Falling Water. That's why it's called Mill Run. So we were going to leverage the existing labor and knowledge that of wood and do solid timber construction. So again, single stroke solution. The solid timber would be the structure, interior finish, exterior finish, and it would also be the thermal. So some model images. We put them across the field from the house where you would dine, and what this was for is educational outreach. So they have high school students that come here from all over the world, university students that go here and do programs. And so that's what the project, it wasn't just for a scholar. It might be a scholar, it might be a couple, might be a professor or a high school teacher and 8 students per cabin. So there are these different sleeping berths, but the kind of maybe the most potent memory that you would go back with is just walking across this field and walking, just in between. So that was the idea, just walking across the field back and forth. These step into the forest. They get some south winter sun, then they look to the west and they're shaded by that ecotone. This kind of threshold of thickness that you move through before you get, that's the thickness, I guess, and before you get to this view. All right, in Utah. This is it's one of the last projects, so I'll try to move it along here. This is kind of a dream project that we got Marwan Al-Said, Rick Joy, and I got a call from this crazy Austrian that had been recommended by Bruder to give us a call. Bruder was too busy. I think he thought these guys were kind of flaky. They were talking to some big name architects, and he said you could continue to do that or you could talk to some young architects. So he gave our 3 names. This guy came and talked to us. He liked all 3 of us. And he asked if we would consider working together. We were young and stupid, just started our practice. We said yes, we knew each other, we were friends. You know, like 10 years later it got built. Pretty interesting story. 1,400-acre horseshoe canyon that opens north to the Grand Staircase Escalante National Park. Adrian Zecca later got involved, who's the founder of Amman Resort, so eventually the most exclusive hotelier in the world came to the site, thought the site was amazing. They're a hotelier that's about doing the anti-hotel and hotels that are very specific to place. And we had to go to Thailand and Bali and get massages and research. It's really hard work. We hit it off. Adrian, at some point on the top of this 60-story tower in Singapore, he asked, what would we do? And we had obviously thought about this a little bit. We said that, a lot of your resorts are about working within existing cultures, or living cultures. And here we really didn't have a living culture. And that what we did have was landscape, and we felt that what we would do is abstract the landscape. So we had a little block of cast concrete, and we said our idea is to cast the resort out of one material, and that it's eroded by the movement of the body instead of wind and water. So it's a kind of conceived as a mass ruin akin to the landscape. So Adrian, he picked this site right here. I guess I didn't touch this one in 55 minutes. So Adrian picked this site, and we had walked this site. We knew every square inch of this site. We'd worked on it for 4 years before Adrian walked the site, and he's like a witcher. He was there for 45 minutes, and he picked a site that we'd never walked, never been on. And we were marched out there, and we were told this is the site, and we're like, really? And we didn't really know at first, but we quickly came to know that he had picked this amazingly serene, he's a Buddhist guy, he picked this most serene spot on the site, away from the cliffs and the detritus of the cliffs. I mean, giant boulders roll down here and stuff. So he picked this very quiet spot. Kind of, you feel like you're in the middle of this horseshoe canyon. And this island rock, this is 170 feet high. These are 800 feet high. And there's a major sand dune that runs down the middle of this site. And it opens to that view. So this is us being told this is the site. And this is how you watch the sunset. You look east. And you watch the reverse sunset on these cliffs. Amazing grasses, 14 different kinds of sages. You wouldn't recognize it from this quick presentation, but we went to this site a lot. And we went all times of the year, and every time we win, it was different. So it's really amazing. Landscape, we would go out here different times in the evening. There was Don Julio involved, Foyer de Monterey, cigars, and late night discussions about really how to not screw this up. That was the big discussion. And we kind of designed the project through narrative and actually writing out, talking about stories that people would tell their loved ones, their friends, when they returned from this place. So we did a lot of that. It got built. Here it is, kind of receding into the landscape. This is a camera. So the plan kind of hugs that low rock and has to hinge in places. And so where it hinges is these cameras that as the body walks across, you pan the landscape. So that was one of those discussions about Westerns and why people have a fascination with this landscape. So those happen at 4 points. So the design kind of hugs this low rock. The way you enter is you drive all the way around and you come here and then you don't even know where you are. You're fairly near the highway where you came, but you don't know where you are. You just see the end of this. You come into this natural bowl, which we thought would make a great arrival spot. And we talked a lot about how you want these resorts to work. People want to be alone. They want to disconnect. But they sometimes want to come together. So this is a kind of piazza space, which is a living room, dining, kitchen, pool that engages this rock. 17 rooms this way, 17 rooms this way. So all rooms are kind of equidistant to that piazza. And we also were interested in creating a solitary experience, kind of quintessential experience with you and the land. And so we knew we had to be on the desert. We wanted to walk outside and not in a corridor. We placed the spot, the most sensual part of the site, the highest part of the site. These are some villas that are in these separate valleys. You arrived in that bowl. You walk up this stair. Actually, you walk up this stair first and then up the steeper stair. This is looking up at that 170-foot point. And then this is walking up the steeper stair, and that's the painting. That's the art in the lobby, the exterior lobby. The idea of camping on the desert floor, kind of circling the wagons and creating a settlement. Ideas of a star bath or sky bed. This is the living room, this idea that came from discussions with Bernd Kuhlmann, who's a developer here now in Austin. Some of you may have run into Bernd. And Bernd's a very interesting, he's the crazy Austrian. And we had this crazy conversation one day about how do you build in a landscape, and this idea that, like in Europe, they're not as bashful about building in landscape. They build on top of a mountain. And so he was talking about this working in Mozambique and the jungle noises, and then hearing this transistor radio that was streaming radio-free Europe in the jungle, and this juxtaposition between something man-made and the wildness of the jungle. And that led to a saying that another thing that drove the project was that the nature of wildness is reinforced precisely by the insertion of the man-made. So this is our idea of a very clear insertion, like this is settlement, and beyond that window, you know, it's wild. And it's like very clear, that line. And it creates a kind of interesting condition. This is how some drawings, how we model it, how everything magically arrives is from this underbelly that serves everything up here. That's looking back at the pool rock. This is it under construction, 1,100 feet long, kind of this Michael Heiser piece. It's like a, you know, very tall building on its side. This is the material, casting it out of one material using local sands, local fines, local aggregates, reusable gang forms that utilize fin form, which we ordered in 5x10 sheets. We did through bolts instead of form ties to decrease the frequency of the things that hold the molds together. And the idea was to cast stone. And then with the fin form, you get a highly reflective surface that is acting like the silica that is in this frozen sand dune that is the Entrada sandstone. So if you think of the sandstone as silica, glass particles that are refracting and reflecting light, that's what we were trying to do with this wall, because we knew that would be very dynamic with the light, and that would be how it would maybe dialogue with the geology of this place. So here it's reflecting the sky, here it's reflecting the wall, the light's gone down, it's muted. We also had the opportunity, which is always the case with Amman Resorts, to do all the interiors, all the graphics. This is how we did that, some renderings, the final project. So looking at the landscape informed the interiors. This is the one street, the one exterior street, and we thought about it conceptually as a street. This is actually behind the loading dock. So we had this canyon, but so it's a kind of practical issue, but it's also how could that be phenomenal? So it's first spatially like a slot canyon. There's dripping water, the smell of water, the sound of water that disguises loading and unloading, weeping walls of water that are now growing moss and ferns and are starting to be a canyon. We also designed the graphics, which was looking at place at the scale of the body or at the scale of the hand. So these are obviously like a branding iron. This is one of the super suites. This is where Brad and Angelina stay. We all thought, we were told, that the big market would be Europe and Asians that are interested in the West, but it turns out it's Hollywood. You bathe in Mass, you enter through Mass. Between the Mass, you have that camping on the desert floor. So we ratcheted all the furniture down a little bit so you're more with the horizon. This is the star bath. The smell of water, the room number, the do not disturb rope. That was a budget issue. We couldn't afford a gate. Luckily, Amman they said, well, what else could you do? What about a rope? And so we did a do not disturb rope that is woven horsehair, which looks at the Spanish tradition in the West. I mean, we drew this. There are drawings of that. This is the shower hooks, which is kind of similar to the branding. Funny enough, the subcontractor for all of this work was a female metalsmith, blacksmith, and the name of her business is Iron Megan. This is the chairs that are ratcheted down, and they're rawhide, and that's another tradition of the landscape and the place. Captures light. The spa is conceived as a series of tumbled forms, and it's about going into volumes that remove you from the landscape. So you're in between these volumes. You kind of are beginning to be removed from the landscape. There's a point when you come out of a massage, you have this very spectacular place in the site, but this is how you know if a massage is happening. These things are hanging on the door. And this is the interior of the massage rooms, and this is just a story that when we went to the opening, this Navajo woman was in the spa, and we were talking to her about, like, how do you like it and stuff like that. She basically repeated this script back to us about when I came to work here. I went into the treatment rooms, and she told us she cried, that it reminded her of her grandmother's hogan. And that was the story that we had talked about, how the Navajo as sheep herders, they're out in this landscape all the time, and yet how they chose to live was this 8-sided log hogan with a fire in the middle with no view. And so we talked about that as kind of removing yourself from the landscape. But this non-architect basically told us the story, and I think that's the capacity of architecture, to actually communicate at a visceral level, at an emotional level, to people that know nothing about architecture. So to me, that's the test, maybe, is that if someone needs the script to understand what you've done, that might be a problem. And so we found in the most satisfying thing about this project is reading the blogs, which is all these stories that the narratives that designed the project are the things that people actually experienced, but they've never had access to those. This is my photographer, Nick LaHoo, capturing a squall coming into this site. Ripping the site apart, kind of showing us how the landscape was formed. Evening shot. So I'm gonna get to the Desert Courtyard House, but I see people are needing to leave, so I'm gonna whisk through this part. This is north up here in Canada, another resort. I won't say anything about it. A resort in Hawaii, Land Division, Macau, Mackay, Qatar. So I'll say this, though. This is important. This kind of gets back to the beginning of the lecture, and I'll show you Desert Courtyard. Not surprisingly, the context of a site is often most holistically interpreted and presented to us by historians or artists through a systematic yet very personal process of tapping into the soul of a place. Artists for some time have been constructing installations that dialogue with context in a way that is specific to the qualities of a place.
So Will Bruder really turned me on to this kind of work. My mentor, Will. And the first time I went to Lightning Field was with Will, and it's definitely a huge influence on my work. I discovered Donald Judd after doing my house. I didn't know about Donald Judd. And I am influenced by him. Bill Wright, this biographer, wrote this little statement about Judd, that this was his dream, to create art that resonated with space and light, to place it where space and light would never be tamed and distorted with development and pollution. Judd, at this point in his life, insisted on creating art that was in a specific dialogue with light and space. Those that have not been, the largest art museum in the world, permanent art installations that are dialoguing with a specific place. They don't go gallery to gallery. They're here and only here. So in that way, it's like what we do. So Desert Courtyard is way out here at the edge of our city, the edge between the city and the upper Bahada Sonoran Desert. It's a courtyard that really responded to my client and the site. My client, they're very reserved people, very soft-spoken, very, people that chose a site that was not a King of the Hill site. It has a great view, but it's lower than all the other sites. All the other house sites in this community look down on the house. There were some very unusual pieces of geology on the site, like these volcanic rocks. The rest of the site is granite. There was an arrow rock, a saguaro, and so we had this idea of a courtyard that would be about having access to light, air, view, but serene and contained. And that we had this idea of corralling a kind of piece of the sky. So this is a little statement. I won't read it all, but mass, hollowed mass, faceted mass, fissured mass, mass that cracks open and hinges apart, informed how we proceeded to give this home its defining qualities. So from the courtyard plan to split massing to the millwork, that's the concept, is this solid form that's cracked open. One side is kind of fallen down the slope, one side's lifted up, so it's kind of spiraling up and out to the view. These are some early sketches of mine. This is the view, which is kind of this quintessential multi-layered Arizona sunset view. The volcanic rocks as we found them, or as we found them in that shot you just saw. This is what became known as Arrow Rock, which pointed to the view. There was a flat face that we thought might make a good spot for a fire. The plan evolved like this. First courtyard idea of a dark shadow that recedes into the landscape, filling that courtyard with mesquites from this wash that would shade the courtyard. And this idea of Ingawa. So it's in Japanese architecture, an Ingawa is, first, it's a loose collection of rooms that are not well defined. It's also an open veranda that engages the landscape and that allows you to circulate between those somewhat not really defined rooms. So this is our Ingawa. It's a glazed Ingawa. These are our rooms: living, dining, kitchen, entry, master suite, master bath, garage. Instead of the gallery, they collect a lot of objects. The gallery was always part of the program, but we, instead of putting the gallery in the living room, we pushed it across the courtyard so that you look at the objects from a distance and you are enticed to walk over here and look at them more closely. Guest bedrooms, a library that you can cut across the courtyard this way or go around. The wife's study, the husband's study, just an alcove and used to be a BlackBerry, now it's an iPhone. A spa, media room. This is a better view of that in Gowa. These are the volcanic rocks, Arrow Rock, the Saguaro. These are some sections, obviously. This is kind of it spiraling up and out to the view. So we built first, we first conceived that the mass walls would be rammed earth from the site. Rammed earth needs a good foot and a good hat. So to get the rammed earth walls out of the washes that almost completely surround this site, it's kind of a peninsula. Washes all around except for this one spit of land that allows you to get out here to this flat site. We built the walls up and conceived this as a kind of a land-based, land-scaled plinth, and it was cast as kind of one contiguous stone, battered on its outsides, 3 degrees, sandblasted to dialogue with the granite, and then other places, always where it's horizontal, it was ground with the terrazzo grinder, big terrazzo machines or hand grinders. We hopped up the normal aggregate mix for concrete from 3/4 inch to 1.5 inch. It's a highway mix. We have some of the most beautiful aggregate in the world, Salt River aggregate, very multicolored, very, very hard. And we wanted to presence that geology in the house. So what's interesting is that the previous image, the sandblasted concrete and this ground concrete are the same concrete. So it's the same material worked differently. This is a fire pit that works with that flat face of Arrow Rock. This is cutting a stair into the plinth. So we're cutting, this guy was a mountain climber, he was up there in a big concrete saw, cutting these things and then grinding them. And so here you can see that material is the same material, the rammed earth. All the rammed earth came from the site, so there's no import and no export. It compacted beautifully. I'm sure you know rammed earth is very ancient construction. The wall of Ranji is rammed earth, actually more revered than the garden itself. And you know, in Morocco, there's still ramming earth the old-fashioned way with a stick and a burlap sack with dirt in it. And here we do it with pneumatic hammers, ramming about this much earth to about that much. And here it's rammed, it solidifies so tightly that it's silver and oblique light. Some non-lintelless openings that kind of presence light as an artifact in the wall. This is one of the washes, and right as it comes to the entry, that's where the house kind of cracks open. It's lower down this end, and then it kind of spirals up and out to the view. So there is this kind of spiral up and out to the view. So it was interesting to sit with this client and say, we're going to not look to the city. We're just going to look this one direction, and having a really intelligent conversation about that. Really an amazing client. This is that hinging open of the millwork. So the millwork wasn't originally conceived this way, but it became this. It became very, massive, very volumetric. There's no thinness that you ever read. You crack open these volumes. So those are corner doors. You put your fingers into a bronze hole. There's a contour that feels your fingertips. You crack it open. It's one Wingate log that was laid up in vertical and horizontal grain, and then a piano finish. So the piano finish is actually something only recently affordable. It's a kind of an ancient Chinese finish that you've seen Chinese lacquer that's like 60 wet sand operations to get a highly reflective finish. So you don't really notice the grain much, but when you get up close, you suddenly have this engagement with it. Kind of where you would expect vertical grain, it's horizontal. Where you expect the other, it's the other. This is the house in the landscape. I like that you can't see it very well. That was intentional. It passed 4-3 design review. It almost didn't pass. It's a pretty enlightened design review group there, and we did get through, but it was challenging because it didn't meet exactly their guidelines. But we think it recedes more than anything else there. This is how you walk in. The entry is recessed. That concrete plinth is ground or sandblasted. Sometimes the roof canopy of Corten steel folds down to allow access for the car. It also folds under kind of origami-like and becomes the ceiling. And the ceiling is mill-finished steel, so it goes from Corten steel to mill-finished steel. And it came from a comment that the client mentioned they loved being out there at night in the darkness of the desert. And so the idea of the ceiling being mill-finished steel was that it's merging with the night sky. And that's one thing that happens. So the entry is kind of warm light that if you come into this. There's a couple of really large pieces of glass that come from the largest glass manufacturer. I used to thought I knew the largest. We found a larger one, Rochester, New York. You have to give them 100% deposit. I like it because it's so big that you just think it's not there. And so anyway, you can see how this spirals up. This is how we crank open the windows. We worked with the kind of genius guy that works with Tom Kundig. This is a sun and planet gear. That's how you resolve opening 13 to 14 foot high window and opening it and having it hold open and then closing it at the top and the bottom with minimal effort. And it's a rigid chain concept. Interesting. This is the gallery. You kind of, the Ngala space folds under you. You kind of walk over the desert. This particular floor is, there's some lead in there, so you get a little green tint, but the rest of the glass is Starfire, so optically clear glass. The idea of that ceiling going dark at night is that you start to read this as one space. So you don't have a double reflection. You light the courtyard, all of a sudden it becomes one space. The volcanic rocks, they become little bird baths when it rains. The gallery, the reflection you're seeing is both in the glass and in the Wingate. The volcanic rocks. Oops. And this is really low winter light coming in. The leaves are off the mesquites in the winter, so you get a little more sun. They shade the glass pretty well in the summer. This is, my client made a comment they would like to take a shower outside. So it became a 1-ton onyx door that is like open sesame. You push this handle and you open this 1-ton door, and the shower controls and the shower heads all go with it. This is a piece of onyx from where the stone came from, so you can sit here and wash your feet. This is that door partially open. This is it fully closed. And this is this kind of triangular sky space. My client likes triangles. And so they showed up. Kind of became this faceted geometry. And it's also a very interesting and very new for me collaboration with an interior designer that actually brought us the project. And we had done a studio for an interior designer. We had no problem working with an interior designer. I was certainly raised at Taliesin not to work with them. But we had a great collaboration. They know the history of interior design like we know the history of architecture, and it's a very high level of craft. And I guess one point is there's only 2 very small pieces of furniture in the entire house that are specified. Everything else is drawn from scratch and built from scratch. They actually have a metal shop, and they have CNC machines and paint booths, and they also selected some of the objects they're in many things there to talk about. But so one challenge for the house was, how does it absorb all that? Just kind of the visual weight equation, like how do you reduce the number of lines, create the kind of most elemental space that can kind of absorb their life, and still they're feeling the place and the landscape. So these giant doors, I didn't point that out, but they all kind of pivot out to view, and the couch pivots out. This is this Sandoz condor that this was all designed, this graphic, this column to hold this guy. This does happen, this is not Photoshop. We kind of said we're never going to publish this image because people just won't believe it. So I only show it in lectures where I can actually say that that's real. I'll just whiz through this pretty quickly. Some housing projects that we're doing in the valley, some other houses. This is where we are, is on Central Avenue, the kind of spine of our city, the central street of the city. We did an adaptive reuse. So this is my studio. So this is where it happens. We bought this about 5 or 6 years ago when the economy tanked. Going to do a little housing project above this. It's in the Transit Overlay District. I kind of knew I wanted to be here permanently because we were also doing a restaurant around the corner, which is another adaptive reuse. An old architect's studio. I'll just make one comment about this, that the floor was very springy. Instead of taking it out, we decided to help it out with this king post truss that takes your eye out to the street. And there's kind of this bar that's indoor-outdoor bar that's on Camelback Road, this major street in our city. And I'll kind of end by talking about food because we're all hungry now. And this is the last slide. And it's just an analogy with, again, what we do. There's as you know, there's kind of, this kind of slow food movement, and about eating local, and, I kind of go to those restaurants because I don't like eating crap. I like eating real food that's not engineered, and that's a whole nother story. But I think, there's a reason for that. It's a complex discussion. But in having a lot of good friends as chefs and hearing them talk is very similar to what we do as architects. It's about relationships. It's about relationships with the purveyors, with the material suppliers, the people that are growing the materia. I think as students, the more you are familiar with materia, and how it might go together, it's something I think we teach far too little of in school. It's like trying to teach you to cook, but you never even worked with the ingredients. It's the kind of the difficulty of teaching architecture. But for me, it's always been about relationships with craftsmen, with people. It's for people, and I think that's wherever I go. I'm trying to find very quickly those potential relationships, and that's informing the work, because the quality of the work is completely dependent on those things, those relationships. So the quality of what you eat in this establishment is in large part due to the care and craft that those people put into those materials. And so how you respect that process and how you respect those people, and they help inform what you do, I think is one way of hopefully doing work that resonates with the place. So thank you.